We all love South Korea. Everybody knows about BTS. K-pop is world famous. Netflix is full of K-dramas, and some of them are actually genuinely good, they have the world sensibility, even though the English is funny. South Korea also has global technological brands taking over the world. But a few decades ago, this was not the case. In 1962, South Korea's GDP per capita was $87. Not $87 a day, $87 a year. The country was that poor. For context, that was lower than Ghana's, lower than Haiti's, lower than India's. North Korea was actually richer. South Korea had no steel industry, almost no paved roads, and an economy built almost entirely on rice paddies and American aid. Fast forward 3 decades, 30 years later, Samsung was a global brand, a giant. Hyundai was selling cars in America. LG was in all living rooms across Europe. And South Korea was even hosting the Olympics. One generation, one country, the country completely transformed. So, how did this happen? In a very short time. And if you watched our last video about how India produces global CEOs, but not even one global brand to reckon with, this episode is a direct answer for the question we ended that episode with. What did South Korea do that India didn't and is not yet doing? Before you can understand what South Korea built, you have to understand what it started with. In 1950, the Korean War reduced the peninsula to rubble. Entire cities were destroyed. Millions died. When the armistice came in 1953, South Korea was left with the southern half, the agricultural half. The Japanese colonial rulers had built their heavy industry in the north, near the coal and iron. The south got the rice paddies and the fishing villages. They were the poor people. By 1961, South Korea's per capita income was lower than Ethiopia's. Over 40% of the population lived in absolute poverty. The country survived on foreign aid. There was no industry base to talk about. There was actually nothing. Then, on May 16, 1961, a general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup. Park was not a Democrat. He suspended the constitution, jailed dissidents, and ran one of the most authoritarian governments in Asia. That part of the story is real and it shouldn't be smoothed over, and I'm not going to do that. He was a dictator, no 2 points about it. But Park also did something that no one expected from a military strongman. He sat down with a group of economists and asked one important question: how do we escape poverty? The answer they came up with would reshape the global economy. Park's plan was simple in concept and brutal in execution. He identified a small number of Korean family-owned businesses, trading companies, textile manufacturers, construction firms, and made them a deal. The government would give them cheap loans, tax breaks, protected domestic markets, and direct taxes to export contracts. In return, they would build Korea's industrial future. They would go global, and they would do it fast. These conglomerates became known as the chaebol, from the Korean words for wealth and clan. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK. All of them were small family businesses before Park chose them as the vehicles for Korea's transformation. Samsung in 1938 was a small trading company that exported dry fish, noodles, and fruit to China. Hyundai in 1947 was a small construction company. LG started in chemicals and plastics. I mean, think about that. LG, the TV in your living room, the company that makes it, it was a chemical company. But Park told these companies, You can build ships. You will build steel. You will build cars. You will build electronics, and you will sell them to the world. When Park decided Korea needed a domestic steel industry in the late 1960s, the World Bank told him it was economically rational for a country at Korea's development level and refused to fund it. Park used Japan's war reparations money instead. Within a decade, South Korea was one of the world's top steel producers. Actually, this is a core of what India didn't do. India had a government which was suspicious of big business houses, committed to socialist planning, and focused on self-sufficiency than global competition. Indian companies were protected from foreign competition, but they were also prevented from becoming global players. The result was a generation of companies that were good enough for India, but not built for the world. Park's Korea did the opposite. It pushed its companies out into the most competitive markets on earth and told them to win or die. For example, if I tell you the story of Samsung, they entered the market in 1969 with black and white color televisions, and they were not good at all. Most of the products were cheap imitations of Japanese technology. Samsung's strategy in those years was simple: learn from the Japanese, copy what works, and get cheaper. But in the 1980s, under Lee Kuan Yew, the son of the founder, Samsung made a decision that separated it from every other cheap electronics manufacturer in Asia. Lee called a meeting of his executives in Frankfurt in 1993 and told them, very famously, change everything except your wife and children. He had spent time in the United States and Japan watching Sony and Motorola dominate global consumers. He came back convinced that Samsung could not win by being cheaper, by imitating others. It had to win by being better and being itself. So Samsung began investing heavily in research and development. It started sponsoring the Olympics. It hired designers from America and Europe, the best ones. It repositioned itself as a premium brand, not a cheaper one. And it actually really worked. By 2005, Samsung was ranked among the top 20 global brands by Interbrand. By the 2010s, with the Galaxy smartphone series, it was competing directly with Apple and winning in many markets, especially India. Today, Samsung alone accounts for roughly 20% of South Korea's entire GDP. That single statistic tells you everything about what a domestic company built for global domination can do for a country. But this story also has a different cost, and it would be dishonest to tell you this story without mentioning that cost, a dear cost. The chaebol model created some of the most powerful companies in the world, but it also created enormous inequality, political corruption, and a corporate culture so dominant that it crowded out smaller businesses and stifled competition. Chaebol executives have been convicted of bribery, fraud, and tax evasion repeatedly. Samsung's chairman Lee Jo-young was jailed for bribing a former president. The relationship between the chaebol and the Korean government was not just cooperation, it was after collusion. The ordinary Korean workers who built these companies in the early stages worked long, brutal hours with very low wages and minimal protection. So speaking, the miracle on the Han River was built on real human sacrifice, not just visionary strategy. And today, South Korea faces a new problem. The chaebol have become so powerful that they dominate the economy in ways that make it almost impossible for smaller companies to compete. Young Koreans study their entire lives to pass the Samsung aptitude test not to start their own company, but to get a job inside the giant. The system that created global brands has now become its own kind of trap. So, South Korea's model is not one that should be copied blindly. It's actually a model to be understood with its own contradictions. The real lesson from South Korea's story is about intentionality. South Korea decided at a national level that it would create global brands that could give a competition for any reputed brands in the world. But India didn't do that. India was afraid in the beginning, and when the doors opened, all the talent began to leave the country to head other people's brands, not to create Indian global brands. But the good news is that India's startup generation is beginning to ask the right questions. The UPI payment system is a genuine world-class innovation. Companies like Zepto and Razorpay are building at serious scale. But none of them are Samsung yet. None of them are Hyundai yet. South Korea took more than 30 years to build these companies. But at the current global scenario and with the technological advances in the world, India might take another 10 years to reach that level. Maybe, maybe not. Only time will tell. So share this video if you think this was worth your time. Thank you.